Hello again, year 11.5. We're getting to an exciting part of the personal project now. We're at the point where you really are going to put your presentation together. And that's why this workshop is entitled Dynamic Presentation Skills. It's our 8th session. By the end of this screencast, and with a little bit of work on your side, you will understand how to make a creatively inventive, structured, and effective presentation, and also how to improve your delivery, your verbal delivery. So what are we covering today? We're going to quickly look at the assessment criteria, because when you do any project, you need to know how you're going to be assessed to do well. And although this is not a formal assessment, it'd be nice if you got some feedback as preparation for your extended project qualification next year in year 12. So the assessment feedback will be first. We're going to look at some resources from the University of Bath. Many universities prepare resources for the EPQ because they value the EPQ so much. We're going to look at the effective use of slides. We're going to look at the idea of the creative hook, of how to hook your audience. We're going to be looking at signposting, which is used to improve structure. We're going to look at elements of delivery. We're going to look very quickly at the idea of taking questions in case your supervisor has some questions for you. And I'm going to end off by showing you an excellent, very short presentation by a student who did an excellent and interesting EPQ, and she will be giving you some advice. So to start off, you're going to be assessed using the real EPQ assessment criteria. AO1, which is manage, how well you've managed your time and achieved your objectives. AO2 will be, did you use resources properly? And if you want to get a higher grade in the EPQ, the key thing is the idea of evaluating your sources. And that's why we spent so much time looking at the CRAP technique. AO3 is the idea of problem solving, decision making, selecting the right things, and achieving good outcomes as a result of this process. So your supervisor will be looking for evidence that you did all of this problem solving and critical thinking. And AO4, which we'll do a little bit of, but really is more for the real EPQ, is the idea of review. This is something your supervisor might want to speak to you about at the end of the project. The review aspect of the EPQ is your ability to be self-critical and to think about your learning and to think about what you did well. But most importantly, as ever when we do work, how we can get better in the future. Now, how will you deliver the presentation? That's something for you to discuss with your supervisor. It seems to me that we have two different outcomes that you could use. You could either do a live presentation using WebEx, and your supervisor could record that, or if you feel a little bit nervous and you would like to rehearse it and do it in your own time, you could do it as a screencast using Screencast-O-Matic. And I will be putting instructions into the folder from Mrs. Ford on how easy it is to make a screencast. So that might be your preferred. Are you going to do it live, or are you going to do it as a screencast? Either way, your supervisor may be asking you some questions afterwards to get a better idea of the project, some clarifying questions, okay? So it's interesting that you have these two different outcomes and you can choose. What's one of the wonderful things about the EPQ and project-based learning is the idea that the student is in charge and you can make all kinds of decisions about your learning. So why are presentation skills so important? Why is it always seen as a key aspect of project-based learning? Well, we know that presentation skills are highly transferable, that they are very desirable in the employment world. They're a crucial element of the interview process. Or if you work in a job that involves any form of marketing or selling, we know that this will be the key skill that you will rely upon to engage with customers. Presentations build confidence. We see this all of the time in the sixth form with our lectures, etc. Many of you are going to go on to be part of societies, etc. It gives you a voice too. It gives you a voice in your own learning. Many of you may feel that there's a time when you're just crammed with facts that are decided by curriculums and teachers. Presentation skills do allow you to voice your own opinions. And it makes learning, and this is the most important thing in my eyes. It makes learning really enjoyable. And I think in many cases, you're proud of your learning. The presentation allows you to evidence everything that you've learned. Now I'm going to show you a short video from the University of Bath. It is part of a course, an excellent course on Future Learn that you'll find out about more next year. And it's called How to Prepare and Give a Presentation. I think you'll find it very interesting, and we'll talk about it.
Hi, I'm Clive. We're now going to talk about some of the different things to consider when giving a presentation. If you're scared by the prospect of speaking in public, then you're in good company. In a recent survey of the top 10 fears of British people, public speaking came out as number 1. So if you find it a bit scary, remember your audience also understands how you feel and will be rooting for you. And in fact, many professional speakers and actors say that nerves are a good thing. Feeling nervous before a presentation shows how much you want to succeed. Remember, your presentation is not your report. This may seem like an obvious point, but a presentation is a performance. This means you need to consider not just the content, but also the delivery. And this means considerable planning and practice. Think about your audience as well. In a short presentation, you can only communicate a few points. So choose those that are the most interesting and important to the people who'll be listening. In terms of structure, a presentation is like any other piece of effective communication. In other words, it's organized into clear sections, just like the dead fish structure of an essay. And just like the dead fish, all the parts are connected. Structure makes the difference between a presentation and a conversation. If you're using slides, think about how to maximize their impact. The key here is to think about why you're using them. The slides must complement you as a presenter, not do the job for you, nor distract from you. If your whole presentation is on a slide, what are you for? Quite apart from anything else, your audience can read the slides more quickly than you can say them. So the best slides are charts, maps, diagrams, and other images. If you have to use words on your slides, and you might, we're not saying you shouldn't, use the minimum possible. If you want your audience to read a slide, stay quiet and give them time to read it themselves. Whatever you do, do not read from a script. If you do this, more likely than not, you will speak in a monotone. And on top of that, you will lose eye contact with your audience. Instead, write down your key points so that you can glance at them when you need to. By the time you come to give your presentation, of course, you'll have practiced it so much that you know what it is you're going to say, and your notes will work as prompts if needed. The last part of your presentation is the question and answer section. The best way to prepare for this is to anticipate the questions that you think your supervisor and others may ask, and think about how you would answer them. If you don't know the answer to a question, say so, but then offer to find out later. If you need to buy time, repeat the question before giving your answer. When it comes to your presentation, you're the expert, and it's your experience you're telling the audience about. So nobody knows more about it than you. So be yourself, find your own style, and be confident. Remember, everyone wants you to succeed.
Right, some excellent advice there from the University of Bath, who prepare very good resources on the EPQ. I think the idea that everyone wants you to succeed is absolutely key. And success can be guaranteed with thorough preparation and knowing exactly how to put together an exciting presentation. One thing not to do, and I see it very often with students, is death by PowerPoint. Now there's a superb YouTube video here, and I urge you to look at this. It gives you some fantastic advice from a world-class speaker. But I will just go through some of the key points myself. Rather than watching lots of PowerPoint slides and having someone read off them, and I mean what I say, that reading is really criminally boring. An awful presentation is to watch somebody read texts or slides. Please don't do that. You're going to need notes to guide you. And as a rule, we say about 80% of the information should be on your notes and not on the slides. I may seem like a bit of a hypocrite that I'm reading off slides in this particular case, but that's because I'm doing a screencast. And if I was doing a presentation to you, I would only have the graphic PowerPoint there and Death by PowerPoint. And I would tell you the information I'm giving you now. But because this has an educational dimension to it, it's a screencast, I've put on more text than I normally would. So when you're doing an actual live presentation, the slides are only there to anchor you or to illustrate the presentation. They're not there to provide the bulk of the substance of the presentation. As a rule, fewer slides and more talk. Because the worst thing, as I say, and literally does kill your audience, is to watch slide after slide with someone reading long paragraphs from them. That is not what PowerPoint was invented for. Now, some other important things. There is nothing worse than if somebody puts on a huge slide like this with loads of details, etc. This particular one is about cars running in the streets. Now, let's imagine this is a geography student delivering this to the class. Your eyes don't know where to look immediately. The mind boggles with the oversupply of detail. So this is an example of a terrible slide. A much better one would be one where we can actually conceive of the information, where it's absolutely clear. And this slide, someone would talk to for at least 3 minutes, using the cursor like I am now to illustrate different points and to explain why these statistics are of importance. So it is a key thing that if you are going to use stats and figures and studies, use them economically and do not have too much information on your slides. In terms of colors and fonts, etc., I'm sometimes guilty of this. Not too many colors, not too many fonts and styles. Animations can occasionally be effective, but are usually absolutely awful. I'm somebody who hates Prezi, for instance, because I get vertigo from all the moving graphics, etc. I would prefer to see simpler, cleaner slides that allow you to speak and the content of your speaking to be the focus, so that what we're looking at is the substance of the presentation and not the graphic effects. So, keep it simple. Too much animation will spin your audience, as I say. They will distract from your message. The purpose of your presentation in this case is to inform and to argue. So it is the substance that really matters. That said, I'm a huge believer in pictures, and sometimes giving your audience time to look at a picture, and as they say, the old cliche, a picture's worth 1,000 words. In fact, a picture's worth far more than 1,000 words. Here we can see one of the dead albatrosses, and their carcasses are littered with plastics and batteries, etc. It tells you so much about the environmental damage that we are doing in the world. There is not a need for a lot of narration in this particular case. So the graphics and the images that you choose can be absolutely key. I'm going to show you an image which I think is one of the most disturbing and upsetting, and I thought carefully about this, but as you're entering the sixth form and you're going to be doing more critical education, I think it's worth looking at. This is a horrendous photo of a vulture stalking a starving baby. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning photograph, and it says so much about suffering and hunger in Africa and famine. And this photo, for instance, could be the beginning of a presentation where immediately your audience will be transfixed because of the horror of the situation. And going back to the albatross again, I think if you let that sink in and you let your audience think about the absolute devastation, again, you probably have them hooked. So what is a creative hook? How can your topic or question translate to something which is interactive or really interesting? Okay, so possible starting points is you could create an environment. Imagine this. You can employ your audience and activity. But given that we're online, that's going to be much harder. That's more of an EPQ technique. And you can begin with a questionnaire. But you can actually do that with your supervisor. So you can begin with a challenging questionnaire. Or you can begin with images. You can begin with music. You can begin with video. The important thing is to engage your audience from the start. I'm going to illustrate this by a real project that was done with me 2 years ago by a student. She was an excellent scientist, very, very brilliant. But I felt as though her delivery was a little bit formulaic. She was extremely clever at science, so I felt as though she was probably going to talk over the audience and we wouldn't understand what she was doing. And her topic, silver nanoparticles, was very, very difficult and technical and new for most of us. So we talked about how could you get the general public to listen to something that was so technical. And when we discussed it, what we found out was one of the major uses of silver nanoparticles is as an antibiotic to treat absolutely deadly infections. Now, some of you may have heard of flesh-eating bacteria. There, in many cases, are no antibiotics to treat this, and literally your flesh is eaten away by this terrible thing. So, in order to introduce the idea of silver nanoparticles and to engage the audience and to think of what would be a good creative hook, she began with the idea of what flesh-eating bacteria does to you. And that so horrified and engaged the audience that she was then able to speak about some of the technicalities of silver nanoparticles. So we're always looking for you to engage your audience by thinking about this creative hook in the beginning. What the actual project about can follow this. So following the hook, you need to introduce your topic. You need to say, today I'm going to be looking at this. Obviously, you're going to talk about your research question, and then you are going to signpost and structure your talk and tell your supervisor, I'm going to be covering this, I'm going to be covering this, I'm going to be covering this. You need to use the right language for your audience. So in this case, you're showing that you are highly academic, that you've read quite a lot of stuff. So you're going to be using standard English, and you're going to be using some specialist vocabulary. It may be that you need to explain this. For instance, if I was going to do the presentation on silver nanoparticles, I would first have to define exactly what they are, because your audience won't know, okay? And then thinking about your delivery, it needs to be confident and it needs to be smooth. And that will come through preparation and rehearsal. So you prepare your script. As I've said in a previous screencast, you decide on your main headings and you decide on your subheadings, okay? Number the slides. And as I say, remember, more is less. Sometimes having too much detail and too many slides actually affects the quality of your presentation, okay? Here is the idea of rehearsal. Now, some of you may laugh at the idea of preparing in the mirror, but so many great business people do this. So many corporate leaders do actually look at themselves in the mirror. I know that when I deliver assemblies in the sixth form, I love to go in early, and I'm usually very embarrassed if someone walks in because I like to actually rehearse them, looking down and feeling where I will look at the audience and how I'll try to engage them. So in your case, you can rehearse at home and drive your parents mad, even more mad than they no doubt already are. Eye contact is important even in an on-screen presentation. Shiftiness and not looking at your audience takes away from your aura of confidence. Eye contact creates a positive atmosphere. It makes your audience feel included, and it makes them want to watch you far more. So please think carefully about eye contact. Pace and pauses are absolutely key. Any of you who do drama will know that pauses speak a great deal. They allow the audience to think about your words. So vary your pace. Maintain a good pace, but vary it with pauses for effect. Very important that you relax and you breathe deeply, and remember that your audience is on your side. Once again, I've included a YouTube clip here. If you're interested, there's another excellent TEDx talk that gives you far more detail on verbal presentations. Now, handling questions, this is an interesting one. Okay. The key thing I do think is you don't need to answer a question immediately. I often, when I'm asked a difficult question by a student, buy myself a bit of time. And I think I'd say something like, that's an excellent question. Let me just think about that quickly. Sometimes I even sit at my desk and I take 30 seconds. I might even write a couple of notes to guide me. Don't feel threatened by questions. And if you don't know the answer, don't panic. This is something that happens in university interviews when students go to Oxford or Cambridge, and we teach them that even if you don't know the answer, it's an opportunity to show that you're a good learner. Because you can say something like, that's an excellent question, and I don't actually possess all of the information that I need to answer that. But I can guarantee you that after this talk, I'm going to go and look it up and think about that, because that's an interesting line of inquiry. Don't waffle in your answers. Try to keep them clear and focused. And if you get into trouble, once again, don't simply repeat yourself. We're always tempted to do that. So, how prepared are you? You've decided on your title and your aim. You've narrowed it down. You're at the point now of deciding about your visual aids. We've talked about how to handle your slides. We've talked about handling questions. You know who your audience are. You're going to decide on your structure, and you're going to signpost for structure, and you're going to rehearse your talk, and then you're going to deliver your talk. And let's just go back to that initial slide just to remind you that you will decide, are you going to do a live WebEx? That could be very interesting, and it has the advantage, live is always more interesting. Or will you go for the more secure option of Screencast-O-Matic, where you can pause it and you can think about what you're saying? The choice is yours. In both cases, however, you will need some form of rehearsal. Now, in the folder, in the SharePoint area, I'm including an excellent checklist from the University of Southampton, another university that do a lot of resources for EPQ students. And if you like, you can work your way through this checklist to see that you're well prepared for your presentation. And now it's time to hear from a student who's got some advice. He delivered an excellent presentation at the EPQ evening. He's someone of Italian and British heritage, and he wanted to go back and find out something about his country's history and about his own family's relationship to it. So he delivered a really interesting presentation on Benito Mussolini. Mussolini was the Italian dictator who was in power before and during the Second World War, and he was killed towards the end of the Second World War. And I think you'll find his advice very...
Hello everyone, my name's Jack Conan and I'm a year 13 who's completed an EPQ on fascist Italy. In this video, I'll be focusing on the presentation aspect of the EPQ, and I'll be giving you some advice on what to do and what not to do in order to make this presentation as good as it can get. So how I started off my presentation was I described what the EPQ was, what my topic was, and most importantly, why I did the topic. What made me study for just under an entire year, and what encouraged me to do all of that work. So, for me personally, with me being such a history nerd, combined with my half Italian heritage, I wanted to study about my side of the family that I didn't know anything about. I took all the time in the world to study about Mussolini, perhaps the most controversial Italian leader, and in the presentation I wanted to emphasize how important it was for me to study more about my half heritage's past. In the rest of this part of the presentation, you can also cover some key events, some key words, and generally introduce the concept of your topic to the audience. You have to assume the audience don't know anything about your topic. But don't go into too much detail as it can take away from you, the focus of the presentation. You also want to summarize your argument. The extent of your argument is a very important thing to bring up. You also want to introduce how it links to modern day. Of course, your entire project is going to be very interesting for someone to read, but is it useful for the common person to read? You have to emphasize that. For me, I used images of current world leaders because of how political my topic was. So it can vary on the person, but you really need to emphasize how useful this information is to the common person. After that, I discussed the process, my initial research and plan. You can also introduce things like how you found your supervisor, how you found your topic, and the initial research, so what you used, books, name it all. But the most important part about this section is probably the external research part. For me, I took time out of my summer vacation to go to Italy and visit sites that were incredibly important to the topic. So whether it be Rome, Milan, or his birthplace, I took my time and visited, took some pictures, made some notes on the places I visited. Whether it's surveys, whether it's interviews with professionals, anything, put it here and emphasize how much work you put into this project. Because at the end of the day, it's an incredible amount of work that you want to show off. After that, you could cover the writing stage. So, most importantly, difficulties. They're incredibly important here. You want to show how you found certain things difficult and how you overcame such difficulties. Very important. Also, what did you gain from it? It's very general and you've gained a lot of skills from this. Just highlight them and bring it up. But with my conclusions in the presentation, I'll bring up some general advice for doing the presentation. Firstly, you want to maintain focus and you want to be confident with how you speak. For me, I'm quite a shy guy, so it was a huge challenge for me to be able to go in front of a lot of people and talk for 20 minutes. How did I overcome this? Well, I practiced, and practiced. It takes a lot of practice for this to get right, but do it as many times as you feel comfortable with and you will ace it. I used cue cards to help me because I dislike how a script makes me feel quite robotic when I'm talking to people. And because I can elaborate on a lot of things, I feel like cue cards will only be there for an emergency because with the amount of practice I had, I could give the speech without the cue cards or with the cue cards because I've done it so much. But keep something there as an emergency just in case you're so nervous that you have to look at something to edge you on again. You want to interact with the audience frequently. Make them feel like they're part of the presentation because they are. Hand gestures and looking at them are examples of this, but generally you want to keep the audience engaged. At the end of the day, even though the presentation is about you and the journey you took, you need to keep the audience with you. Don't just talk them to death, make sure they're with you. Also, don't make an overly complicated presentation. The focus is on you and what you're saying, not the PowerPoint, so I didn't use any animations, transitions, GIFs, any cool designs, just it needed to be there as a backup. So if an audience member was perhaps lost with what I was saying, they'd look behind me and there's the exact topic and the things that I'm talking about, just not too much detail because they would have to listen to me for that detail. But lastly, calm down, breathe and enjoy it. Before you go into this presentation, make sure you're not too nervous. I know nerves are something you can't prevent, but just make sure you are as ready as you can before you give this presentation. Because at the end of the day, presentations are a life skill, and you need to be confident so that you can prove it if you don't feel confident enough. Good luck, everyone. I know your ace presentations, but just keep in your mind that relief is on its way. Because once you finish this project, it's going to feel fantastic.
So some fantastic advice there from Jack. It was a wonderful presentation, and I hope you enjoyed hearing from him. Just to conclude for today's screencast then, we looked at the assessment criteria that will help you to see what it is that your supervisors are looking for. We've looked into the effective use of slides. We've talked about how important it is to signpost, to use headings and subheadings. We've talked about the importance of delivery. We've looked at the idea of using a creative hook to begin. We've looked at the importance of using notes and rehearsal. And I've given you the opportunity of making use of the University of Southampton checklist to guide your preparation. And finally, we've talked about practicing taking questions. Now, I hope that you are able to use this information productively, and I have no doubt that you'll create some excellent presentations. In the final screencast that I do, I'm going to teach you some tricks with graphics, etc., and you'll hear more from students. Thank you for listening today.
Trust me on that. Thank you for taking your time for watching this.